Mr. Bryce, we're ready to receive your testimony.
America's electric grid is our most critical piece of energy infrastructure. The grid is the mother network, the network upon which all of our critical systems depend. But the affordability, reliability, and resilience of our electric grid are being undermined. Over the past few years, the fragility of our grid and its vulnerability to cyber attacks, physical attacks, and extreme weather events has become ever more obvious. I understand this vulnerability firsthand. In February, my wife, Lauren, and I were blacked out in central Austin for 45 hours during Winter Storm Uri. Between 2000 and 2020, the number of what the DOE calls major electric disturbances and unusual occurrences on our grid jumped nearly 13-fold. Sales of standby generators made by companies like Generac, Kohler, Caterpillar, and others are soaring. Our grid is being fragilized by three things. First is the increasing reliance on weather-dependent and intermittent renewables like wind and solar. In August, the North American Electric Reliability Corporation identified changing resource mix as the most urgent challenge facing the electric grid. It also said our generation capacity is, I quote, increasingly characterized as one that is sensitive to extreme, widespread, and long-duration temperatures, as well as wind and solar droughts. The prolonged wind drought is one of the reasons why Britain and much of Europe is in an energy crisis today. In March, at a Senate Environment and Public Works Committee hearing, Xcel Energy CEO Ben Fowke said, I'm quoting, at higher levels of intermittent renewables, the cost of the energy system begins to skyrocket and its reliability degrades. The second factor, dozens of coal-fired power plants as well as several nuclear plants, which provide resilient baseload power and help keep the grid stable, have been prematurely shuttered. The closure of those plants has made the grid more reliant on just-in-time delivery of natural gas. I'm pro-natural gas, but since Enron declared bankruptcy 20 years ago, the amount of gas burned for power generation has more than doubled. Finally, regional transmission organizations like ERCOT in Texas and CAISO in California are not providing enough incentives to assure the reliability and resilience of the electric grid. So what must be done? First, Congress must prevent the closure, should do all it can to prevent the closure of more coal and nuclear plants until regulators can be certain that their closures will not reduce the reliability and resilience of the grid. Second, the federal tax incentives for wind and solar energy, the PTC and the ITC, which are costing taxpayers billions of dollars per year, must be eliminated. These subsidies distort wholesale power markets, make the grid more reliant on the weather, and undermine the financial viability of the thermal power plants that are essential for grid reliability. For years, renewable energy advocates have claimed wind and solar are the cheapest option. It's high time for them to prove it. Third, Congress, along with federal regulators, should develop rules that incentivize on-site fuel storage at power plants. The blackouts in Texas that I lived through showed that the most reliable power plants during the blizzard were the ones that had on-site fuel, including the coal and nuclear plants. Federal incentives don't have to be limited, though, to coal and nuclear. They can also include fuel oil, which can be used in quick-start combustion turbines or in large reciprocating engines. Power plants with on-site fuel are absolutely essential for system resilience. If a regional grid fails, the grid operator must perform a black start to re-energize the grid. Those black start generation units must have on-site fuel. And in the postmortem of the ERCOT blackouts, it was clear that those black start units were not ready, and many of them did not have enough fuel. Fourth, Congress must act to stop the closure of existing nuclear plants, including the scheduled closure of the Diablo Canyon plant in California beginning in 2024. The closure of our existing fleet, including the April closure of the Indian Point nuclear plant in New York, was a travesty. Congress must also work to accelerate the licensing and deployment of small modular reactors, which will bolster resilience and help with decarbonization. In conclusion, for too long, policymakers have ignored the fragility of our electric grid. The grid is our biggest, most complex, and most important piece of energy infrastructure. We take it for granted at our extreme peril. We cannot allow our electric grid to fail. Earlier this year, the writer Emmett Penny had it right when he said, there's no such thing as a wealthy society with a weak electric grid. We cannot afford to have a weak electric grid. Thank you very much.
Can you, Mr. Bryce, talk a little about the benefits of a diverse energy portfolio and how energy innovation in renewables in storage technology in advanced nuclear and hydrogen and carbon capture and storage technologies can really help to provide for a more stable grid and more energy affordability?
Well, that's quite a laundry list there, Senator, but I will take a couple of cracks at it. First, to the issue of natural gas and this push for electrify everything. I do indeed think it's not just a bad policy, it's a dangerous one. And I speak from personal experience. During the February blackout in Austin, my wife and I bought our house 21 years ago. One of the first things we did was plumb in natural gas. And so we were 45 hours without electricity, but we still had gas so we could cook. We had hot water. We could keep at least the kitchen warm by turning on the burners. The idea that we would just rely solely on the electric grid for all of our energy needs, including hot water for cooking, et cetera, for heating, is just a bad idea. And unfortunately, we see in California now more than 50 communities have banned the use of natural gas in new residential construction and in many commercials. It's also a regressive policy, Senator. The price of electricity on a per unit of energy basis is 4 times that of natural gas, according to a notice in the Federal Register published by the Department of Energy earlier this year. So as far as the other issues that you mentioned, let me just touch on the nuclear because you brought up a lot of issues there. I'm adamantly pro-nuclear, sir. If we are serious, and if the Senate, if Congress, if we're going to be serious about decarbonization in the United States, we have to get deadly serious about nuclear energy. This is the 5th time I've testified before Congress. I've been consistent over the last 10 years in my testimony before Congress. If Congress is going to be serious about decarbonization, we need bipartisan long-term support for the development and deployment of new nuclear reactors, and we need to preserve and extend the lives of the existing reactors in our fleet.
You know, the rest of the world is going to surpass us unless we catch up on that technology.
The Russians and the Chinese are the ones that are now leading internationally on the development and deployment of new nuclear. French President Macron, just in the last few days, in response to the gas crisis in Europe, said the French are now going to be deploying small modular reactors. The U.S. needs to get off the dime and move quickly.
That's not happening right now with small modular or nuclear power. The reasons I hear most often is the cost and the investment there, but the capital that's required to be able to do that initially. And the second issue has become the permitting, that no one wants to put $8 billion forward to be able to prepare for a nuclear power plant if it's going to take 15 years in permitting and the uncertainty of who will be president and what the rules will be when they actually get to that spot. Is that correct? Not correct? What do you think is the reason we're not seeing more nuclear power at this point?
Ray Rothrock recently said the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and the federal government present, in terms of the licensing, an uncontrollable risk for investors who want to build new nuclear plants. The length of the licensing process is a gigantic hurdle. We've also had the recent experience of the nuclear plant in South Carolina being canceled. The plant Vogtle in Georgia is over time and over budget. I think that it's clear as well that those plants, and generally speaking, are just too large. We need smaller reactors that are going to be lower cost, that we can build at scale and do so quickly. How do we scale up a new nuclear manufacturing sector in the United States? Robert Hargraves has a company called Thorcon. His idea is to fabricate them in shipyards.
Europe and in many parts of Asia, they're dealing with availability of electricity right now. They've had a pretty significant challenge in multiple different areas in Europe and across China. We're watching that. We're also watching in India in capabilities. What are the key features that you see there in Europe, China, India, that they do not have enough electricity right now to be able to supply demand? What do we need to pay attention to there to make sure we don't have that here?
Based on what I've seen traveling around the world over the last 5 years, India, Iceland, Lebanon, Puerto Rico, New York, Colorado, people, business, and countries will do whatever they have to do to get the electricity they need. And so what we're seeing in Europe is a return to coal in a big way because natural gas is so expensive. We're seeing spot prices of coal in the international market now for the Newcastle benchmark at over $200 per ton, and in China, in some cases, over $300 per ton. We're seeing the deindustrialization across Europe because of a lack of natural gas. You see fertilizer plants being shut down, which will have knock-on effects in the slaughterhouses, knock-on effects in food supplies in the coming years because farmers don't have enough fertilizer. This is due to underinvestment in hydrocarbons. And now this is not a popular view, but this is the reality. The world still runs on hydrocarbons. And now we're seeing without enough natural gas, Europe is in crisis, and it's affecting multiple industries where steel producers, aluminum producers in China are shutting down. We're seeing the knock-on effects of not a lack of renewables, a lack of hydrocarbons.
Thank you for that. That's helpful to be able to get a context on. Again, this particular subcommittee, we deal with the issue of energy diversity to try to make sure that the United States maintains a diverse energy portfolio that works and that is reliable and that's resilient enough to be able to manage it. We've obviously seen some gaps in our resiliency in multiple areas with blackouts and things that are happening in California, with what's happened in the Great Plains, in the Midwest, in the Storm Uri last February, but we've seen in other areas as well. So we're going to continue to be able to work on this.